Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our first Wednesday walkabout since we got back from Scotland. I have so much to share with all of you. We'll start doing that this weekend. But first, I thought we just needed to get back into some kind of routine, which is very difficult to do after you've been gone for 2 weeks. And I'm going to go straight into my question of the day because I want your tips, tricks, and hacks for what you do to get back into the groove after you have been gone for a while, because as we all know, it's a challenge, and a challenge a lot of us are facing right now because it's summertime and we're getting back from our respective vacations. So please put your answers in the comments below and we will make sure to share them. So today I thought it would be kind of fun for me to talk a little bit about something I haven't talked about in a while, and that is my garden manifesto. If you have not gotten a copy of my garden manifesto, then just make sure to sign up for my newsletter, go to my website, and you can download a copy of the PDF. But one of my favorite things on that garden manifesto is don't let your plants boss you. And what do I mean by that? Well, I thought I would give you some very strategic examples because definitely while I was gone, my garden in general decided to boss me around a little bit, and I will not have it. So for the past couple of days, I've been whipping it back into shape with these 5 strategies: remove, replace, cut back, thin out, and train. So I'm going to give you 5 examples of those things one by one if you too need to, let's say, resume your role as the alpha dog in your own garden. Okay, my number 1 strategy is to replace. Now, I know sometimes this can be hard. We have to admit defeat. We feel bad because we have killed something. And you know what? That's okay. If to garden is to suffer, if you kill something, then just get over it. And sadly, one of the things that died while I was gone was my beautiful mossy pot, or it appeared mossy. What it was a wonderful, wonderful container of creeping thyme. Now, this gives me an opportunity to thank Stuart and Leah profusely for watering for me while I was gone. They did a great job, and casualties are just inevitable when you're gone, especially when it's something like this that was very, very pot bound. Now, there could have been some mitigation strategies that I could have employed to keep it alive. Number 1, I could have reminded Leah that it was on the table and it needed to be watered, which was my bad. Number 2, we could have moved it to a less sunny location. Number 3, I could have repotted it so it wasn't so pot bound, but that's all in the past. We're talking about the future.
How did you know that it had gone? You knew. You asked us about it. You kind of poked fun at us when we were on the ring.
Yeah, because one of the things that's interesting is I can see from my Ring doorbell. Isn't that amazing? That from
we didn't think you'd be able to.
Millions of miles away, I can kind of see
way
what's
over
going
there,
on
yeah.
in my front yard. It gives me a sense of security, and I thought, oh, do I spot a little bit of brown? A little bit of brown on the table.
A little bit.
And you know what? That's okay. By that time, I knew it was a garden. But, you know, no harm, no foul.
No, it's all
so
good. It's just funny.
When anything dies, it creates a new opportunity, and this gave me an opportunity
For this guy,
to
gorgeous.
replace the dead creeping thyme we see
there it
here with some new beautiful succulents that won't need to be watered as frequently. Now,
baked loaf or something.
I have to show you because that's kind of cool. And look
It
at the
is.
roly-polies already doing their work.
Wow.
I set this aside. I didn't put it in the trash because I wanted to show you that is kind of cool looking, but you can also see exactly how root bound it was.
Yeah.
It had consumed all of the soil in the container and it had nothing else to really sustain it. So what I did was just replace it with this Pure Joy succulent. Now, what I did was a twofer. It addresses another thing on my list, on my garden manifesto list, about not letting my plants boss me. That is thinning out. And I actually thinned this out from the garden where it wasn't doing its best because it was being crowded out. And it also is one of my other things I love to do, which is steal from Peter to pay Paul. At this time of year, it's hard to find new plants to replenish and refresh our container plantings. So this turned out to just be a brilliant solution, and I love the way it looks. I'll like it even more because I plan on cutting it back a little bit once it gets settled in.
Love that pot.
So, I know the pot is just brilliant. If you want a container like this, I know you will ask, I would suggest trying out Calvert's or some of your better nurseries, maybe even estate sales, because that's where you'll find something so wonderful. This was actually gifted to me by a friend of mine. So what did I do? I just dug up this succulent, which, by the way, typically that kind of moving around, you don't want to do this time of year, but succulents, no problem.
Nice.
So I just I completely replenished the soil with a 50% blend of a Espoma organic cactus mix for succulents, and then just a little bit of general potting soil. I had some Miracle Grow. So what I did was I just did a 50-50 blend to ensure that this gets good drainage. And I really like the way it looks. One other thing that I'm going to do, which I haven't done as much here at the cottage, but in my assessment of the summer garden, I'm going to start doing it again, and that is mulching my pots with gravel. So
that blue stuff?
This is the gray. This is the gray. I got this at Lowe's. Now, get out a pair of your Cool Jobs garden gloves.
But this is the new kind of darker,
this is the new gravel.
When it gets wet, it looks kind of blue.
Yes, when it gets wet, and plus this has, this has some powdery film on it. So I will just top dress this with gravel. That will also ensure to hold in the moisture. And say it with me, why do I top with gravel? Because it keeps out squirrels, it holds in moisture, and because I just like the way it looks. So there we go. I will show you this after it's finished, after it's watered and in its completed state. So there is my #1 recommendation and strategy for not letting your plants boss you. Well, that was an example of 2 of the strategies in my Don't Let Your Plants Boss You portfolio, remove and replace. That was in a container, but I'm also doing that in the flower beds itself. And here is an example along the stepping stone walkway into the perennial border on the east side. So within this area, I had all sorts of salvia that had gone to seed, had germinated, and actually the plants were getting pretty large. I removed most of those so as not to hide the stepping stones, and then I replaced a couple of them with some plants that will be a little bit better mannered, let's put it that way, better mannered, and won't encroach upon the stepping stones.
Less bossy.
Yes, less bossy, thank you. And in this case, it was one of these purple ball basils. You may recall that I was growing some of these in one of my seeding troughs. So I put it here in place. It was easy for me to transplant because it's a heat lover and the root ball wasn't that big. And I used this handy little trowel that my friend Kat out in California gave me. It's wonderful for this kind of tight space gardening. You can also see that I did just a little bit of pruning, not drastically, but just a little bit of pruning on some of the other plants that were starting to get a little bit too rambunctious and a little too bossy, if you will. So here's another example of what I was talking about. I removed some salvia from this area. I replaced it with something that was a little bit better mannered, had better formed. So Stuart, if you can ever so gently back up.
Boom.
Very good. Very well done. Stuart used to be a tennis player, so he can do that kind of stuff. But you'll see an example of what I'm talking about here. So this is the salvia. It's both East Friesland and some other varieties. This is the salvia that has gone to seed pretty rapaciously. So I've got some here, I've got some along these stepping stones here, and what I will probably do is remove them, either transplant them, gift them, or in some way just dispense with them.
So
now,
the purple guy salvia?
No, this is Veronica. This is a salvia, and I'm going to guess it's one like this. I might leave some of this here, actually, because I like the way it looks in spring, and always think forward to the next season before you take this kind of action. Yep. But nevertheless, because my garden is now mature, I don't need these plants to be kind of stuffed in here. Then I have a better idea of what the overall design is going to be. It's the luxury of a garden that's a little bit more mature. Anything that I cut back that is showing some signs of distress or whatever, or portions of the plant are, then I will remove that as well. So there you go, 2 examples of my first 2 tenets of don't let your plants boss you: remove and replace. Now, the next strategy in my arsenal of not letting my plants boss me is to cut back, and sometimes cut back hard, sometimes gently. I always like to have my trusty long-bladed pruners on hand to do just this, and then also some of my little pruners so that I can do more delicate kinds of work. But let's take a moment, if you will, just a moment of zen to appreciate how gorgeous, even in these temperatures, that these moon dance hydrangeas look like. I think they are just absolutely stunning. I think part of that is because of the variety. This is a Southern Living plant. I really have always thought that White Wedding was my favorite, but Moon Dance might replace it.
Oh man.
Then again, it could also be because this has optimal exposure.
Yeah.
These are on the east side, so they get morning sun, they get absolute afternoon shade, and that's really what they want. They also have perfect drainage because they're kind of on a slope. Now, surprisingly to me, my Encore azaleas are starting to come out, and that white on white is really, really beautiful. Look at all the buds on there. So they kind of, I think it got so cold late in the winter that they didn't bloom much this spring, but now they are blooming this summer, and I imagine will also bloom in the fall. These up here are white. You can see these over here in the distance. And I've got others that are pink, but I digress. Let's talk about cutting back. So number one, if a plant looks buggy, if it looks like it is insect infested or whatever, you can do one of 2 things. You can completely remove it, or you can cut it back. Now here's an example of something that looked wonderful in the spring, but now doesn't look good. It's either got spider mite. It always takes on this kind of mottled appearance as soon as it gets hot. So I can do one of 2 things. I can remove it or I can cut it back. In this instance, because some of it has gone to seed here, this is that wonderful golden feverfew.
So tiny.
All I have to do is just sprinkle some of this seed at the base. I will save this branch and I will save this seed. I'll do that a little bit later. So what that tells me then is that I don't need to cut this back. It probably won't perform as well when it comes back anyway. So I am just going to remove it. I want to give this whole area more breathing room. Like I say, don't let your plants boss you.
I was about to say.
I will be. Notice how I didn't fall over when I did that?
You did good.
I don't even care that I didn't get it out completely by its roots, because it will just then kind of rot in place.
There's a lot of roots there.
And go back to the compost that will regenerate the soil. So that looks better. It is not there anymore to kind of mess up the look of this border. It thins this out, and I can remove it. I can cut it back. Sometimes removal is the best strategy. But let's go back to cutting something back, because this is the perfect example. And you really just need to be brave.
Let's switch sides.
Yeah, okay, switch sides. You need to be brave. Here, let's do this. It's a tap dance.
Way better.
You need to be confident, and do not be intimidated by your plants, especially if you know that you babied your plants at the outset. You really set them off on the right path, and I indeed did that with the things in my window box. All of those wave petunias, the vervain, the Dusty Miller, everything that was in there. So you can see that I have already really whacked it back hard.
Yep.
And that is the official horticultural term. Now, does it look like heck right now? Yes, it does, but that's okay, because I want to restore its beauty. And Stuart, right here, let's put a picture of what it looked like at its best. And in short order, this will start looking good again. So when you say, so how do I do that? This is how I do it. I just do it like that.
Not too much worry as to where you're going.
Not too much worry. I'm not looking at leaf node placement. I'm not looking at anything like that. I'm just cutting it back. The other thing it does is it will then make sure that the blooms that come out are where I want them to be, and that is right along the edge of the window box. Now, I can do this because these plants, even though they are suffering, they are still very viable because they've got such a good root system in place because I planted them in the spring. So what will I do next now that I've butchered them? Well, I'm going to do two things. Number one, I'm going to spray them with some BT, some bacterial thuringiensis or thuricide spray. I showed that to you before. Stuart, let's put a little picture right here. Because not only were they decimated by the heat, but they were also decimated, I think, by budworms. And I wanted to address that. So after I cut it back hard, I did indeed spray it. And that should take care of that. I will do that repeatedly according to the recommended directions on the package. And then I will give this a really, really good feed. And then this is one of those instances where I'm not going to worry too much about being organic, because this is a container planting after all, and I'll probably just use some kind of fast-acting, water-soluble fertilizer like Miracle Grow. I'll just attach it to my hose end, and I will really give this a good feed a couple times a week, and that will make it come out again in all its glory. I think it will look great. And there's enough beauty in the foreground that certainly from a distance, you in no way really miss the drama that it provides to this area. The other thing that I did is I just kind of keep tending to my sunshine ligustrum, which has been the perfect plant for this area. Some of you commented, won't it get too big for this space? And ultimately, yes, it will. But right now, the area, the size of the plant itself will be somewhat restricted just by the containment of the window box. Yes.
Didn't we just see a giant one somewhere?
Yes, we've seen giant ones in a number of different places, and I just love them. We saw a giant one at Carol Blackwood's. If you haven't watched that garden tour, watch it, and also at John Turman's.
Yeah.
So here it is doing just fine. It also tends to shade out those plants. It gives me privacy in my background and
it looks good.
Bathroom, and it will really look beautiful this fall. So let's do a time test. Okay, today is July 10th, I think. And we'll see just how long it takes for this to recover. But that is the next strategy in being the boss of your own garden, and that is to really aggressively sometimes prune and cut back things hard. Now, another benefit of the strategy of cutting back is that it not only improves the appearance, makes it look like your garden is better groomed, but it also gives you better air circulation and gives a little bit more movement with the plants that are surrounding it. And here is a perfect example of that. So I had some mounds of catmint or nepeta, however you pronounce it. And you can see that I have cut all these back into a tidy mound. They run up and down. the sidewalk that leads up to the front porch. I've done it on both sides and along the walkway on Lemon Lane. You can see over here, or get our shadows out of the way. Now this not only makes them grow a little bit more tidily, better behaved, but it will also force new bloom. I will give them just a subtle feed, not an overly aggressive feed, of some kind of organic material, organic fertilizer, but I'm not going to go crazy because again, the temperatures, even though we've had a little bit of a reprieve, they're going to get hot again. The other thing is paying attention to timing. Now I cut back a lot of these things at this time for two different reasons. Number one, I just got back from vacation. Number two, we did have a reprieve and a gentle pruning and cutting back on my evergreens is possible when it's not too hot. And we've had temperatures in the upper 80s and the low 90s. In addition, we've just had a great rain. So pay attention to whether or not the weather conditions are amenable to doing what you want to do. If it's not, then you might want to wait. You might to work on those areas that are in the shade and leave those full sun areas for later. A lot of it is just being attentive to your own garden and what is going on. After you do this kind of work, make sure that you record the timing and what you did exactly on what plant specifically in your garden journal. Well, you may have noticed that a lot of these tips kind of go hand in hand. One thing leads to another, and that is definitely the case in my final strategy for not letting your plants boss you, and that is training. Now, in training, you're not only going to be influencing its form, but you are also going to be doing a little bit of thinning out. This is an example I have showed you before. This is a beautiful one of the sister magnolias, the sisters being Anne and Jane. And this one earlier in the season, I showed you how, with the help of some stakes and some bracing, I am trying to influence its form because I want it to be more of an open vase-shaped form and not a tight goblet-shaped form. And you can see that definitely these trunks are starting to grow in that direction, and eventually I'll be able to remove the support. Now, I also want it to look like a small tree and not like a large shrub, so I'm going to be doing a little bit of thinning out. Now, please note that sometimes when you are thinning out or cutting things back, you are doing it aggressively, a la my window box. And sometimes you are doing it a little bit conservatively because it's not the optimal time of year to be doing these kinds of things. So all I'm doing is removing some of the suckers and some of the lower growth because I want to expose the legs, the good looking legs, on this gal. I think I'm going to remove, I've got some suckers that have come up from the base. So again, I'm not doing anything overly aggressive, but I do want to train this in stages as it grows. And I am going to do just that. I might leave this one here and ultimately have it move over in this direction. So I'm just going to remove some of its lower leaves. Now, the other thing that does is it reduces the density of foliage, not only from this plant, but if I want to get better air circulation and better light down here, I can also kind of conservatively cut on some of the surrounding plants.
Limbing it up, kind of, right?
Limbing it up, and here's another example of some of that less than happy golden feverfew that I can pull out here. Again, I know I can do this safely because I can come back later and I save some seed and I can reseed it, because when this stuff looks good, unlike in Scotland where stuff looks good year round, this stuff looks its best in the spring. So in this area, I think I'm employing just about every one of my tips. And because it just rained, this is another thing that speaks to doing these things at a certain time because of the rain. Look at how easily that stuff is pulling out. So immediately by thinning this area out and by training this beautiful magnolia, I am enforcing my will upon the garden itself. In other words, I am being the boss of my own garden. I hope these tips were helpful to you. Replace, remove, cut back, thin out, and train things in your garden to give it a tidier appearance going into the heat of the summer.